Well, hello everyone. Here I am again recording my radio show, which airs on KHNC 1360 Weld County on 2 p.m. every single Saturday. This again is pre-recorded rather than live, as I will hopefully be doing some in the future because I am traveling to Libertarian Party conventions. Once again, this is being recorded at, well, last time I think it was 2 in the morning. Now it's 4 in the morning. But let's see how I do at this ungodly hour. This is just a bit of an intro to catch up with the little time delay that happens with the advertisements and other such things that is running on the radio station right now, as I do like to at least be somewhat synced up so that if any live listeners would like to interact in live chat, they can. I will try to be present for live chat. That's not always possible, as I'll be on the East Coast. I will be at the Libertarian Party of South Carolina's convention this time. First time ever at a convention in that state. So I am really, really looking forward to it. So, all right. One shameless grifting thing, I guess, to do before we get started, and that's along the bottom there. Please like, subscribe, and share to this video. I really need to do better at boosting the YouTube algorithm. Also, I am only $10 a month away from my November Patreon goal, as this is entirely listener supported and is right now my only source of employment. I am starting a more traditional job next week, but it is one that does not require the amount of time that the former one that was making me miserable did, because I intend upon developing liberty activism and liberty content, but at least that will help pay the bills in the meantime. All right, let's get started. Just give me a moment. We'll get caffeinated and we're going to start the show. Well, hello everyone. It is Karen Ann Harlos once again with the Pink Flame of Liberty. I am of the House Anarchy, mother of parrots, purveyor of liberty, and a herder of Libertarian National Committee butts. And I think since the last show, I don't believe the decision had been released yet, and actually the decision has not yet been released on my ouster from the Libertarian National Committee as a whistleblower, but it has leaked out, apparently because some of the people who have voted to remove me wanted to cover their political rear ends and made some phone calls ahead of time to, again, cover their posterior. So the decision has leaked out that my ouster has been affirmed. The written decisions have not yet come out. I will be analyzing them in full when they do, because that will be plenty of fodder for delegate consideration at the Libertarian National Convention in Reno in 2022. Whether you agree with me or not, I am sure that there will be plenty of discussion around those items. There's also been some news that has come out that surrounds the issues of public and personal criticism of public figures that I'll probably be discussing in another episode. On this episode, though, I had said last time that I had wanted to discuss the issue of the win in Broomfield County of ranked choice voting, issues of ballot censorship, alternative voting, and reform of our voting system. So that's going to be the majority of this show. As always, I solicit your commentary. You can always write me at pinkflameofliberty@gmail.com with comments and suggestions. And also, if you are interested in becoming an advertiser on this program, the rates are extraordinarily reasonable, and I would love to have you as a sponsor. One news story I would like to get to, though, that I just loved. Like, I'm in love with this woman. Let's just put it this way. I am totally in love with this woman. Before we discuss the Colorado not just Colorado actually, our national woes with our electoral system, which just stinks. It just stinks to high heaven. But to do the rustling of paper, was that Rush Limbaugh that used to do that? But I think that's just become stereotypical now of talk radio, hasn't it? The title of this is Anti-Mandate Teacher in Illinois Reveals She Had Been Vaccinated for Months. At first, I thought this was a Babylon Bee article. Like, that title is just like, you don't really know where they're going with this. And we have reached such clown world proportions in our society that it is peak Poe's law. If you don't know what Poe's law is it is when the parody of something becomes indistinguishable from the reality of something, such as the modern feminist movement. You can't tell sometimes when you read a parody account of some crazy thing, and here I am talking as a pink-haired gal myself, so let's use a different color. Some blue-haired feminist did. You can't tell the difference between the reality and a parody these days. And that is why the Babylon Bee is so good, because sometimes you read the headlines and you're like, this could be real. But here we go. With anti-mandate teacher in Illinois reveals she had been vaccinated for months. I love this woman. The point that she proved was just so poignant, and I admire her bravery. Not to overly compliment myself, though this will come off like as some kind of weird humble brag. I don't mean it that way. I would hope this would be something I would do. It sounds like something I would do because it proves a point, and it's kind of trollish in a way too, and it's got a lot of humor in it, but I don't know. I might not have been as brave as her, because when you're putting your income on the line, it does take bravery, and not all of us have that. And her name is Cadence, and I love that name too, spelled with a K. Cadence Cohen, a business and math teacher at Southeast High School, had defied the state's mandate requiring teachers to provide proof of being jabbed or submit to weekly testing, the State Journal Register reported. Instead, she chose to take unpaid leave. And just so you know, this story that I'm reading from is from the New York Post. She was on unpaid leave, and I guess still is at the time I'm doing this show, until November 17th. But then she finally did upload a copy of her vaccination card, which shows that she had already been vaccinated for months. She said that she decided to come clean because she missed her students, basically. But she did this to prove a point, and I love the point that she proved. I personally am not anti-vax. I'm not saying I'm not necessarily anti-vax this COVID vaccine. I do not trust this COVID vaccine. I'm just being completely honest with you. But in general, I am not an anti-vax person. Generally, my reaction when I hear about a new vaccine is take my money. I don't want to get sick. I don't doubt vaccines. And in case you didn't know, I personally have autism. I do not believe vaccines cause autism, though perhaps they do. I don't know. I don't care. I'm just saying. I'm just giving you some personal facts here. So I'm not anti-vax whatsoever, but I am anti-mandate. And I am getting so sick and tired of the two being conflated. That's why I love what this woman did. She obviously is not opposed to the COVID vaccine, but was willing to put her principles on the line. And even though she fully qualified to not have to risk her job or her paycheck at all, stood in solidarity with those who are defying the absolutely illegitimate government mandates. What a hero. She stated, "I didn't want to have to produce a vaccination card because I don't think that's legal or appropriate," and she is correct. Here's where I'm not going to say she caved, because she didn't. She just made another personal choice, where she said, "But if you ask me to choose between my beliefs and my students will win." In that statement, I might disagree with her a little, but that is her choice in her life. Her students may have gotten a much better life lesson by her sticking to her guns. However, that is her life, and I already applaud what she has done already. The teacher said her reluctance to inform the district was always about liberties and freedoms and medical autonomy, and admitted disappointment in not getting the matter settled in court. Whether people agree or disagree with my methods or agree or disagree with my stance, I'm glad people are talking. Heroes welcome, heroes salute to this teacher. As we say, not all heroes wear capes. Now, before we start talking about the main subject today, which is electoral reform and our horridly broken electoral system, this is a perfect time to talk about one of my sponsors, which is a group which is trying to change things, and that is approval voting. Let me explain a bit what approval voting is, because I did have some questions on this. Let's say you had candidates A, B, C, and D, and your favorite candidate was candidate B. But candidate B was a dark horse. I mean, it's a non-zero chance that candidate B would win, but it's highly unlikely. And between candidate A and C, you could live with candidate A, but you absolutely could not live with candidate C. In this first past the post system that we have right now, which is called plurality, meaning the first person to get the most votes, whether or not it's a majority, they are the winner. So we have right now people who are elected to office who not only did not get a majority, they were actually disapproved by the majority of voters. For instance, if you have someone who won with, say, 34% of the vote, that means that 66% of the voters disapproved them. That is not a way to elect representatives. So with approval voting, you would put a check mark or a tick, however the ballot worked, next to each candidate that you approved of, be it strong approval or I could live with this person. And you would not put such a mark next to people that you absolutely could not live with. So in the example I just gave, you would approve of, if I'm remembering my letters correctly here, was it candidates A and B? Excuse me if I got those letters wrong, but basically it was the dark horse and the one you could live with, but you would not put any such check mark next. I believe it was candidate C, who you detested. And maybe if you could live with candidate D as well, maybe you'd put a check mark there. This is one of the alternative systems that is a possibility in our country that could help move us beyond two-party thinking, because first past the post guarantees you will have two dominant parties, and minority voices will always be silenced. Another thing is it will lead to fewer spoilers, because voters can vote for both a candidate that they really like, who has little to no chance of winning, and also a more popular candidate who does have a chance of winning. It will lead to more civility, because a candidate, all candidates, will want your approval. And if they go around calling everyone else that disagrees with them dummies, they're not going to get your approval. For instance, when a group of friends want to stay friends and are trying to decide on a restaurant or movie, they use a show of hands, and that is basically a form of approval voting. There will be less polarization because the voter is not forced to focus on only two candidates. Again, approval voting is one way to move us beyond two-party thinking. You can contact Colorado's approval voting effort by phone or text at 720.439.6000 or search the Approval Voting Party. All right, we are back, and I remind everyone how you can get in touch with me. It is at pinkflameofliberty@gmail.com. You can also participate in somewhat live chat. The two shows aren't entirely synced up, but if you go to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/pinkflameofliberty, you can do so, and you can also see my other Liberty and Libertarian Party-oriented content, as well as a lot of Libertarian Party history, actually. So if that's your jam, please go and check it out. Now I want to talk about Now I want to talk about the win that had just happened in Broomfield, Colorado. So Broomfield question 2A was put on the ballot by unanimous consent of the Broomfield City Council. And I think that is somewhat unusual. So they did not have to petition to get this on the ballot, unlike our very obstinate town council in Castle Rock, Colorado. So it was on there as a referral, and it was approved by 51.75% of the vote to 48.25% of the vote. And raw numbers, that was 11,488 in approval, 10,711 no. So it did not pass by a large majority, but it passed by a majority. What this means is that in Broomfield, ranked choice voting will now be used for all mayoral and city council elections beginning in November 2023. So it will be a few years before this gets enacted because it does take a while to put in the infrastructure. I'm going to read from Ballotpedia here, which gives a good summary of what ranked choice voting is, and then I'll expound upon this a bit. A ranked choice voting system, RCV, is an electoral system in which voters rank candidates by preference on their ballots. If a candidate wins a majority of first preference votes, he or she is declared the winner. If no candidate wins a majority of first preference votes, the candidate with the fewest first preference votes is eliminated. First preference votes cast for the failed candidate are eliminated, lifting the second preference choices indicated on those ballots. A new tally is conducted to determine whether any candidate has won a majority of the adjusted votes. The process is repeated until a candidate wins an outright majority. Now, this is pretty simple to understand. It is something that we are used to doing. We are used to ranking things. You know, when you buy a product on Amazon, you give it 1 star, 2 star, so on and so forth. This lets you give your preferences on a ballot. And just like approval voting, where we talked about before, it allows you to cast votes for candidates that you may not feel have the best chance of winning, but who you prefer, without ever fearing the spoiled ballot or the wasted vote syndrome. Now, this description here, though, it's a little bit too abbreviated because on the first round, and these rounds happen like automatically. When we're describing it in words, it sounds like there's multiple elections that could take place over this long period of time, like if you have 6 rounds of ranked choice voting. But since this is tabulated, obviously by computer, it happens nearly instantaneously. And that is why in races with a single winner, ranked choice voting is also called IRV, or instant runoff voting. It saves costs in those districts or those municipalities where a majority is required to win or a certain percentage is required to win, where it doesn't require a costly actual physical runoff. An instant runoff is done. So when you start getting to the second or third rounds, there are different versions of ranked choice, which some people prefer one over the other. So say in the second round, which candidate is eliminated? Is it the one with the least percentage? And that's the version of ranked choice that is the simplest and the one that I support. But others will do different calculations, having it be the candidate with the least amount of original first place or other such calculations. But I think the simplest way to understand is the one with just the least percentage then gets eliminated. And you keep eliminating candidates until someone receives a majority. This gives us a consensus candidate. So that is one of the major advantages of ranked choice, and that candidate will have been approved, at least in some measure, by the majority of the electorate as the consensus. It will not have candidates elected with less than a majority that were actually disapproved by the majority of voters. Is this system perfect? No. There are some other systems that other people think, such as star voting. I'm not really going to get into what that is, or range voting. Maybe we can do this at another time, that some people think is superior. Let me tell you why I think ranked choice is superior to those overall, all things considered. A, it's easy to understand. There is not an element of subjectivism. For instance, there are some systems in which you score candidates like on a score of, say, 1 to 10, 1 to 100. But the problem with that is one person's 10 might be another person's 5. There's much more objectivity, and somebody's first choice is their first choice. Their second choice is their second choice. So it doesn't have this weird element of subjectivity in it. But also, at least in single winner races, ranked choice can be duplicated by hand. It can take some time, but I could demonstrate for you, and I have on this channel, a simple ranked choice voting. I actually did even a more complicated one. I think it had 6 rounds for when we were electing a new National Libertarian Party chair. I do not believe voters today will trust any system that absolutely requires a computer to do. If they cannot duplicate it themselves by hand, if they wish to, if there could not be a hand audit, they are not going to trust the system. So those are my main reasons. And I just think it is so simple to understand. However, I will admit that things do become more complicated when you are using ranked choice voting in races in which there are multiple winners. In those particular races, I tend to think approval voting might be superior to ranked choice. So it all depends upon the type of election you are having. One reason why I prefer ranked choice over approval voting in single winner races is that it cannot be gamed, or at least it cannot be gamed easily. With approval voting in single winner races, if you do what's called bullet voting, which is instead of using the system as it's intended, which is to put a check mark next to every candidate of which you could live with, if you just vote for one, it can game the system a bit. So I think a combination of various voting systems, which one will be best for the type of race, is where this country eventually needs to be headed. Well, actually, where I think we eventually need to be headed to have a much more representative and less corruptible system is to get to proportional representation like other advanced countries have. But for right now, I am on the ranked choice voting train. This train is barreling through Colorado, and I urge you to put your support behind it if it should come up in an election in which you have a say. Now, you may have heard that there was some kind of disaster with ranked choice voting in an election in New York. It wasn't a disaster of ranked choice voting. It was a typical failure of government. What had happened, as I understand it, is they had done a test run of the system prior to the real election and forgot to zero out the totals before they ran the actual election. That could happen with any voting system, and that's just typical government incompetence and not any kind of flaw of ranked choice. And of course, there are some people who suspect that this was done on purpose to try to taint the idea of ranked choice voting, because ranked choice voting does threaten the stranglehold of the duopoly. And throughout the country, ranked choice was approved in 3 cities this November. So I am looking here at, again, Ballotpedia, and it says voters in Ann Arbor, Michigan, obviously Broomfield, Colorado, and Westbrook, Maine approved ballot measures to enact ranked choice voting for their mayor and city council elections. Westbrook's measure also enacts RCV for school committee elections, and that is a huge win for them. Now, interestingly, in Ann Arbor, the proposal was approved by 73% to 27%, which is huge. This makes Ann Arbor the third city in Michigan to adopt RCV. In Westbrook, it was approved by 63% to 37%. And Maine is one of the states that's enacted RCV at the state level. Hopefully, Colorado will be next. And Broomfield is the fifth city in Colorado to adopt RCV. Boulder approved it for the mayor election only in 2020. Earlier this year, voters in Austin, Texas, and Burlington, Vermont also approved RCV measures. All right, let's head to a short break and we will continue this discussion. Okay, we are back, and once again, I remind you how to reach me at pinkflameofliberty@gmail.com or join me on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/pinkflameofliberty. Now, also, when you contact me at that email address, you can also inquire how to become a advertiser on the show, and I would love to have you as a sponsor. And speaking of sponsors, here's my absolute favorite sponsor. Please, no offense, he will always be my favorite sponsor, and that is my husband, who is a realtor, Wayne Harlos. So if you are in the market to buy or sell your home, I would hope that you would consider engaging a liberty-loving realtor that I can vouch for on the highest terms. Obviously, that is my husband, and he is also the chair of the Libertarian Party of Colorado. He is the main broker at Harlos Real Estate Team. He obviously has excellent taste in women. We shared a home office for years, and in that time, I had seen the utmost time and care that he takes with every single client. In my own life, I have bought and sold several homes, and never did any realtor take this type of time and attention, no matter the dollar value of the sale. In fact, my particular experience has been that if you're a first-time home buyer or seller, that is in the lower value of the market, like starter homes, that realtors often have bigger fish to fry and they spend the least amount of time with you. That is not how Wayne operates. In fact, he takes so much time and care that when job duties call, I'm sometimes kept waiting, and that does not make me particularly happy. Getting a good and caring realtor is one of the most important decisions that you can make. So please do consider giving Wayne a call at 303-229-3435 or emailing him at Wayne@Harlos, Harlos, realestateteam.com. Thank you so very much for supporting Wayne and my family. Now, let's continue on the discussion of the successes of RCV that we began last segment. There are two states, Maine and Alaska, that have adopted RCV for statewide elections. Both of them were through citizens' initiatives. But at least with Alaska, I have to take a look into some of this with Maine. I do think there is a poison pill that was introduced. And the reason I bring this up is because this same poison pill is now being bandied about in Colorado. And if this poison pill is adopted, it will cause me to have to withdraw my support from RCV measures, not because of RCV, but because of this additional measure that is attempted to be introduced. And we're going to discuss that further in one moment. I just want to give a little bit of a summary more here on other states that have adopted it. It says another 8 states contain jurisdictions that had implemented RCV at some level, and another 6 states contain jurisdictions that had adopted but have not yet implemented RCV in local elections. So what is this poison pill of which I speak? It is one of the various forms of what sometimes is called a jungle primary, or top 2, or top 5. And this primary is probably even the wrong word to use for it, but that's the word that's being used. And that is where in the primary portion of the election, all of the choices, no matter which party, are narrowed down to a certain top number. Top 2 has been pretty common. And so what that means is you can have any number of people in your jungle primary, but only the top 2 that emerge from the primary will be in the general election. Now, at first you might say, well, that at least narrows it down to the 2 most popular people. However, let's put RCV aside for a second, because when you combine it with RCV, it might not be quite as bad, but it's still pretty bad. Because in a heavily Democrat area, in your general, you will just have 2 Democrats in the general election, because those will be the top 2 vote getters. Because in the primary, it's not limited to like 1 Republican, 1 Democrat, 1 Green, 1 Libertarian. There could be 10 Republicans. Each one will have different rules. But in areas that are heavily dominated by one particular ideological viewpoint, the general election will just have several choices from that narrow viewpoint. And that does not serve the voters, in my opinion. It just entrenches, again, the ideological viewpoint that's in power and further disenfranchises minority viewpoints, not just minority viewpoints that might be the majority elsewhere, such as in our example, in areas where the Republicans are the majority and then the Democrats will be totally disenfranchised. It always disenfranchises third parties, Libertarians, Greens, and so forth. And as such, I just cannot support it. It will further entrench the duopoly. I do have on my channel, if you search for top 2, a gentleman who was instrumental in getting this implemented in Washington State. It's in Washington State and California right now, where he defends the idea. And while I thought a lot of his points were very interesting, and I did change my absolute and utter disgust for these systems to just utter disgust rather than absolute and utter disgust, or pyrotechnic is the word I like to use, I still am very, very much opposed to them. There's a lot of other reasons this is a poison pill. It also keeps the parties themselves from choosing their nominees. Now, let me explain. In Colorado, we used to have the caucus system or the convention system, meaning that each political party would choose their nominee, not through a primary system, but through nomination at convention. That is the system I favor. Now, in Colorado, with the whole emotionally charged, let Colorado vote, and I'll talk about that because that was such a dishonest campaign, in my opinion. We switched to almost a hybrid open primary type system. However, there were still provisions for parties to opt out of primaries. I am not sure exactly what the thresholds are for the Republicans or the Democrats to opt out of the primaries. I know it requires some kind of changes to their party governing documents. I don't really care what they have to do. I am not one of them. I care about the rights of minority parties. And for minority parties, it is relatively easy to opt out of the primaries. In fact, the Libertarians are only forced into a primary if at our convention a candidate does not get a majority vote. And we can have multiple rounds to get the majority vote. And what generally happens, at least at Libertarian conventions, though it did not happen last time, is that the candidate who did not get the highest will drop out, because Libertarians have such a distaste for primaries. And let me explain why. This might be a foreign idea to those of you who are only familiar with the 2 major parties. Political parties are private organizations. They're almost like clubs. There is no reason that taxpayer dollars, which are stolen by theft, which we went into in great detail in last week's show, should be used to select the nominees of a private club. Those expenses and those choices should be borne entirely by the members of that political party. Libertarians do not want to use theft in order to choose our nominees. That is one ideological objection. But there's another ideological objection. The people who have the most invested in the party are the type of people who come to a convention. Those are the people that are most familiar with what we stand for. And particularly in parties like the Libertarian Party, which is not a pragmatic party. And I don't mean that in terms of internal factions. We have factions within the Libertarian Party, and there's a pragmatic faction and a radical faction. I don't mean it in that way. The way I mean it in is that we are an existentially ideological party. We do not switch our positions depending upon the polls. We live and die by the non-aggression principle. Everything is judged by that. And if you open up our nomination process to just the general public who may not be as invested or knowledgeable or educated in the foundational ideology of the party, we will have candidates that do not adequately represent what we really stand for. That is up to the members of the party themselves. Now, at least if a libertarian primary was limited to libertarians, that at least would be somewhat self-selecting, because somebody who took the step to register as a libertarian, you would hope at least would be somewhat familiar with what we believe. But what happened with the thoroughly dishonest Let Colorado Vote initiative was that people who chose, they were not forced, they chose not to affiliate with a political party, so independents had decided that they have a right to decide the nominees of political parties that they have no skin in the game on. And that is just absolutely and utterly ridiculous. If you want a say in a private organization, join that organization. Now, of course, I am sympathetic to the idea that their tax dollars are equally stolen from to fund these primaries, so I am sympathetic to that point of view. But the answer is not to let people who have zero skin in the game vote in a private organization to choose their nominees. The answer to that is just to stick to the convention or caucus system. Okay, and let's continue this discussion on the poison pill primary systems and what is going on in Colorado that may taint RCV after the break. Okay, we are back, and I'm going to start this off with somewhat of an unusual advertisement, one that I didn't even plan on doing. But as I had been thinking about what had recently happened to me with the Libertarian National Committee and getting ousted as a whistleblower, and those of you may wonder why I am still so enthusiastic about promoting the Libertarian Party when I was done so dirty, and that is because change is a-coming at convention. This is just the ebb and flow of all political parties. It's politics. It's what happens. I do not let myself become discouraged. Instead, I am of good cheer that I was a political martyr in a good cause. And it's going to be the fodder for a future book of mine. But speaking of books, I know a lot of people that listen to this particular station happen to be a religious person, such as myself, of the Christian faith or perhaps of others. So I wanted to let you know about a book I had already written. Man, it's going on maybe 10 years now, a different life. Before I was involved in politics, I used to be very involved in theological debate. And one of the topics that really struck my interest was, is the world really going to hell in a handbasket, basically? And that seemed to be what most Christians believe the Bible taught. But as I started to examine the issue, it made me very optimistic for the future, because I have come to the conclusion that is not at all what the Bible teaches. You can see the cover that I'm going to be showing you if you're watching the YouTube channel. Otherwise, you can get all the information simply by listening to the show. But here is the book I wrote. It is called It's Not the End of the World. And you can find it on Amazon. but I wrote it under a pseudonym. My pseudonym at the time was Dee Warren, which is Dee Warren. Why did I write under a pseudonym? As I said, it was a different life. I used to live in Florida, and I was formerly married to a police officer who was very, very concerned about personal privacy. And because of that and certain safety issues that happen when you're in law enforcement, you use sometimes pseudonyms, and I'm not the first writer to do that. For some reason, there are some people who think they've discovered some deep, dirty secret about me. The fact that I used to use a pseudonym, it's no secret whatsoever. My book is still for sale. I still advertise it. And the last that I heard, and I think the royalty checks that I get still indicate that at one time, at least, it was on the syllabus at Liberty University as required reading. And what this book is about, let me just read you a blurb from the back. It says, "What if everything that most Christians believe about the Great Tribulation and the future that is awaiting the church was wrong? Do you really know what the Bible teaches on the subject? Read as Dee Warren carefully outlines an alternate perspective, and you just might find yourself in agreement." So if you wonder, where, if I'm just being so meticulous with politics, let me give you an example here. I guess this book's about 300 pages, but what really surprises people is the endnotes. There are 440 endnotes. I have always been a historian at heart. We delve very deeply into church history. So if this sort of thing about the Great Tribulation, the end of the world, and all of that kind of cheery material interests you, I would recommend to you my book. You may not be convinced, but at least you will hear a different viewpoint. So let's continue now in politics to change gears about the issue of jungle primaries, top 5, etc., and so on. I do not want non-libertarians choosing the Libertarian nominee. That is just absolutely and utterly repulsive and ridiculous. And when I had went to testify at the Capitol against this Let Colorado Vote measure, we were there primarily standing with Republicans. I do not know why Democrats in general did not oppose this, but it was mostly the Republicans and the Libertarians. And what was really funny about that testimony is you can tell that the Republicans that went there had prepared speeches, and they were ill-prepared to go off script. It was almost like cult members. No offense, listen, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, believe what you want to believe. I'm not trying to insult you. Everyone can have their own religion. But I've dealt with enough the type of Jehovah's Witnesses who very faithfully go door to door that if you get them off their script, they do not know what to do. Okay, I'm a religious person myself. So again, this isn't an insult against religions. Everyone's religion is a cult to somebody. Let's just put it that way. And these Republicans were like that. The minute you got them off their script, they just kept on their script, even when their script didn't make sense. So what was so funny about that is there were a lot of libertarians there testifying, and these Republicans got up, and part of their script was, "We have a two-party system," and the libertarians are looking at each other like, "Hello? Did you miss the dozens of libertarians in this room? I'm sorry, dear sir. They do not have a two-party system as much as you might wish it so. You might have the duopoly right now, but the libertarians are coming for you. Be very afraid." Now, because RCV and similar systems can threaten the duopoly, what I have found is that certain high dollar value infusion, out of state usually, special interest groups try to tie in RCV with some sort of jungle primary, a top 5 like they have in Alaska, or a top 2 or something similar. In fact, the group I'm involved with in Colorado is called RCV Colorado, and I applaud them on principle because they refused over $1 million in funding, if I have that figure correctly, from an outside group that wanted to tie RCV in Colorado to such a scheme. The whole purpose, at least for me and for many others, of supporting RCV is not to further entrench the duopoly. It is to give other parties or minority voices or independents a greater voice and to free them from the tyranny of big money politics so that people start to come first and not money starting to come first. Listen, I'm a capitalist. I don't have problems with money, but I want to have an equal voice and not be drowned out simply by the person that has the most money, but the person that has the best ideas for human flourishing. So if you ever see RCV tied to those things, please know that it's a poison pill. Let's shoot for pure RCV in Colorado. And I can tell you that as long as I am involved in this movement, I will vociferously and, as I say, pyrotechnically oppose any kind of tying of those two things. In fact, when we won in Broomfield in the volunteer group for RCV, along trots in this guy who's trying to go, oh, we have so much momentum for top 5 elsewhere through the country. I would love to help you petition to get this going in Colorado. And I'm like, no, actually, I was a lot less polite. I can't say what I said to him on the radio, but I basically invited him to make a certain insertion. Let's just leave it at that way. Leave this alone in Colorado. Let's have RCV be what RCV is intended to be, to level the playing field. It is so disgusting to me the way these Machiavellian machinations happen in politics. But of course, maybe that was redundant, Machiavellian and politics, but I try my best. That is why I am a libertarian. I am trying to aim for the most human freedom, for the most people, for human flourishing, and for the future of our society. Now, I'm going to end on this note. You've heard me now, weeks after weeks, touting the superiority, that's such a snobby word. That's not even what I mean. But I mean the beauty of freedom, that I would highly, highly suggest and ask and even beg you to check out the platform, the ideological platform of the Libertarian Party. You can find the Libertarian Party, the National Party, at lp.org, but more importantly, take a look at the Libertarian Party of Colorado, since that is your home state. Take a look at our platform, and if you agree, please consider changing your voter registration. Many people have changed their voter registration away from the Republicans and the Democrats, and that is a great step because it tells them that you are unhappy, and politicians understand that, but it doesn't tell them in what direction you are unhappy. For all they know, when you register independent, you could want more socialism, and believe me, you don't want that. When you register libertarian, you send a clear message. If what I have said about ranked choice voting here in Colorado interests you, I recommend also that you visit the website rcvforcolorado.org to learn more, and to learn more about nationwide efforts, though some of them may contain that poison pill I warned you about. You can check out fairvote.org. Okay, everyone, it has been my pleasure speaking with you yet again. Remember, you can contact me at pinkflameofliberty@gmail.com. And next week, perhaps we will talk about the alleged rationale for throwing me off the Libertarian National Committee for being a big mouth whistleblower. Have an awesome day.